I am recording now. Hello. Welcome. I'm excited. We're almost at the end of this book. And next week is supposed to be the official release date for the next Kyoshi book. I've heard that some stores already have it. Like some Barnes and Nobles already have it in stock. But I got it online, and I got it the day of, and I'm getting it the day of its release date, which will be cool. Which will be really cool. Which I think is next Tuesday. I think that's when it releases out, or at least that's when I think I get my thing. I'll check real quick. But this is the second to last reading session for for the Rise of Kyoshi. So just this session and another session, and we're done with this book, which is pretty amazing. It's pretty cool. Okay, let me see. Yeah, it's arriving on Tuesday. Yes, arriving Tuesday. But yes, we shall get on with the book. Last we left off was the raid was successful. Kyoshi ended up not killing Governor Ted because Governor Ted was just a child, and I guess the person they were freeing was the leader of the Yellownecks, which is a very big, I guess you can say Dao Fei. Yeah, Dao Fei, or, well, like a crime boss, like a gang boss. And he is very powerful. And Kyoshi's just like, oh fuck, what did I do? What did I do? And now she is trying to stop him. And she challenged him to a duel. And we just saw a glimpse at the first part of the duel, and he is a fucking firebender. And I'm just like, oh my god, she shoots fucking lightning at her, like the first, not even fire, just straight lightning, straight to lightning. Okay, did I make this worse? I made this worse. Okay. Alright. I just need to clean my glasses, because I'm trying to wear my glasses whenever I read. I think I just made it worse again. I made it worse again. Okay. I will be back in, let's say, 2 minutes. I will be right back. Okay. I'm back. And I just need to lightly pat dry my lenses. Oh, much better. Okay. Excuse me. Alrighty. So now, I decided yesterday where I was gonna leave off for today. Yeah, I think that's where I'm gonna leave off. Okay. So lots of reading today. Okay. So, and also sorry if I keep on like pausing. My eczema flared up so bad today, and I have like a bunch of small like liquid filled vesicles all over my fingers, like all like in between my fingers, and some are pretty big, like not terribly big, but like, well, you could just look up dihydritic. Oh no, I got some eczema cream today, and I put that on, so I might be putting that on throughout the session, because my hands were starting to really, like, they felt super fucking hot. But yeah, I have still have little bumps on my fingers. And now I have the patience. I have the patience now that I didn't have then, not to pop the bubbles, because they're not that big, but they're like small and inconvenient. Like if I do too much friction in between my fingers, or like I something friction in between my fingers, it will hurt, and it will just make it more itchy and more intense. Okay. But yes, I shall begin. Oh shit, what am I doing? There we go. Okay. Like, sorry. I want you guys to feel my pain. Like, it got to the point where I couldn't really wash my hair today. I just put on the shampoo, and like I just rubbed my head like a tiny teensy bit with the palms, not my fingers, but the palms of my hands, and still the water coming down, like, it was hard enough. It had enough pressure for me to feel very uncomfortable, and even running my fingers through my wet hair would make me feel uncomfortable. That's how bad it's getting. But they're not like totally swelling up. They were a little swole this morning, but I think it's back to normal. But yeah, the little bumps are pretty much a nuisance to my existence. But yes, even trying to hold the book is an inconvenience. Okay. Or driving too. I drove today, and that was not exciting. Okay, so now we are getting to a good part. How long? Oh, it's not that long. It's not. This chapter is not very long. Ooh, okay. All right. So, this next chapter, damn, it took me 10 minutes just to get over myself. Okay. So, I'm pretty sure it's dues. I'm looking at it and I'm just like, it says dues. So I think it's deuce instead of like dues. Like I'm trying to think it's like some fancy word or something, but no, it's just dues. Anyway, yes, but this next chapter is called dues. Dues. Oh, damn. Oof. Oof. Okay. Her spine nearly snapped itself in two. Each drop of her blood had been stung by a viper bat. Her hands felt numb and tacky. The skin that had been burned off them. Hold on. Yeah, her hands felt numb and tacky. The skin had been burned off them. Oh shit. Ah. There was a thump and a jolt through her body. An eternity later, she realized it was her knees hitting the ground as she collapsed. The rest of her torso followed. Her headdress went tumbling as her jaw impacted against the platform. With the side of her face pressed against the dirt, sounds were amplified. She heard more than one person screaming. Rangi for certain. Would the others be that saddened? It was hard to say. She caught a glimpse of them and saw only sheer, bewildered horror on their faces, the inability to comprehend what kind of element she'd been struck with. Jiu walked over to the side her face was pointing, blocking her view. She had never heard of bending lightning, never been struck by it, but that was the only explanation for what she'd seen. Cold blue, crackling zigzags running from her fingers into her body. She tried to get to her hands and knees, but collapsed, her chest flat against the ground. "Remember," Wong said from the distant past. "Remember," Wong said from the distant past, a blur of hazy recollection. "It's over when the winner says it's over." Jiu planted his feet and shot another bolt of lightning. Straight into her back. "It shouldn't have been this way." Why did I say shouldn't? "It didn't have to be this way," he shouted. He punctuated his sentence by ending a third or fourth blast of lightning, or by sending. What is wrong with me today? I think it was me talking too much about myself. Now I'm just like, I want to talk more about myself. Yeah, but he punctuated his sentence by sending a third and a fourth blast of lightning pulsing into her body. He intended to cook her corpse beyond recognition. He might be. Or like the first known lightning bender? But either way, this is pretty fucking cool. How's she's still alive? feel like first lightning bender. Probably. Yeah, but Jesus, how in the heck is she still alive, man? You had the greatest gift in the world, my respect, and you threw it away. For what? He kicked her in the shoulder, a meaningless act other than to show his disdain. Don't think I didn't notice how you've looked at me since last night, he said, staring at me with condemnation in your eyes. What you don't understand is that men like me are beyond judgment. She is a Bamf. Totally a Bamf. What you what you don't understand is that men like me are beyond judgment. I do as I will, and the world must bear my discretions with submission and gratitude. A fifth bolt for emphasis. What Ju didn't seem to know was that none of the lightning strikes beyond the first had hurt to the same degree. Kyoshi played dead while she came to her senses. There was still a searching heat that not searching. There was still a searing heat that enveloped her upper half, separated by a layer of fabric. Her survival could have had something to do with the chainmail in her jacket, exposed by the tears and scrapes from last night's raid. Better to stay pressed against the ground until she saw an opening. Zhu breathed again and shot a continuous stream of lightning at a target he thought was surely dead. Kyoshi smelled her clothes smoking as it washed over her body. He was desecrating her. Stop! She heard Rangi cry from far away. Please stop! It was the hopelessness in her voice that set Kyoshi over the edge. The complete surrender of a girl who would have been invincible if not for her love. Kyoshi had put that weakness in Rangi, and Ju had torn it open. He was torturing the person Kyoshi cared about most in the world, and by every spirit of every star in the night sky, he would pay for that. She reached out and grabbed Shu's ankle. The sudden course of lightning into his own body made him squeal, an undignified, high-pitched noise that was music to her ears. He stopped the flow in time to he stopped the flow in time to be dumped on his back, Kyoshi completely upending him. Her eyes felt like they were leaking, not with tears, but light. She thought briefly about swinging Zhu overhead and dashing him against the ground or twisting him like a wet rag in between her bare hands. He was surely more fragile than a solid iron bar. No, he needed to be shown what a true force of nature looked like. His men had to see him beaten not by strength, but by retribution from the elements themselves. She switched her grip on him, from his foot to his collar. She rose into the air, not with dust stepping, but a whirling vortex that sucked her higher into the sky. Zhu screamed and dangled from her grip. The tornado she rode blew the Daofei back. From this distance, they were so tiny and pathetic and human. Kyoshi extended her free hand, palm upward, and the stalks of rice around Zhu's men set ablaze. She curled her fingers closer together, and the flames, accelerated by her winds, hemmed them in. Many of the outlaws shrieked and threw themselves onto the ground, rolling to put out the fires that had caught on their clothes. Kyoshi looked down. Kyoshi looked down the length of her arm at Ju. He shielded his eyes from her, her inner light too harsh to take in. His mouth gaped open and shut like a fish. The air was moving too fast for him to breathe. "You forget, Ju," she said, in a legion of voices synchronized in the eye of the storm. "There is always someone who stands above you in judgment." It was possible that other, more powerful people spoke through her in this moment. There was a chance she was simply a puppet beholden to their collective will. But all but an unassailable feeling of control told her that wasn't true. The voices could lend her insight, eloquence, but they couldn't take over. Many of them seemed to disapprove of what she was doing. Let them, Kyoshi thought. She was in command. She brought Ju's face closer to hers. "What will you do now?" she said, "knowing that your very step will have consequences." She didn't... Fuck you, Avatars, for a bunch of nuts. Basically. Excuse me. Okay. She needn't have asked. Behind the terror of Ju's eyes, there was a stronger, deeper outrage. His soul lacked any porousness, and the chance she so generously provided had washed off like rain on lacquer. How dare she? Was the only thought running through his head. How dare she? Consequences were for his victims. He was a man who did whatever his power let him. Ju mistook her analyzing frown for a lapse in her guard, and spat a gout of flame in her face. "Oh, so he's a firebender," she thought as she diverted the flames off to the side with a tilt of her head. "Okay, so yeah, I think he might be the first lightning bender, if she didn't already know that he was a firebender." "So he's a firebender," she thought as she diverted the flames off to the side with the tilt of her head. A shame for him that he'd given away his intention so clearly, and that Dragon's Breath was the first act of firebending Kyoshi had ever performed. She wasn't as surprised as he'd expected her to be. The lightning generation was unique, though. A refinement of the art, a singular talent. She had so many questions for Zhu about that. Too bad she would never get the chance to ask them. Both Lao Gu and Jianzhu were right in both Lao Gu and Jianzhu were right in some measure. Short-sighted men like Te and Zhu were parasites who gnawed at the very structures they exploited for power and survival. They were blind to the fact that they existed not through their own merits, but due to the warped form of charity the world had decided to give them. And Zhu had exhausted his. Kyoshi was the only thing holding him up. She opened her hand and watched him fall. By the time she touched back down to the earth, the wall of fire that surrounded the Dao Fei had burned itself out. Most of the swordsmen had taken the chance to scatter. Judging by the trails trampled through the crops, they'd fled in every direction, a routed army without a leader. Mok was gone. He and a few others had dragged off Zhu's body before disappearing into the rice stalks. Surprisingly, Wai still remained. He stared at Kyoshi, transfixed, his jaw agape. Reverent. Kyoshi didn't know what to make of the cruel, unusual man. He seemed to constantly need a powerful figure to tell him what to do. Be gone, she said with the last echoes in her throat. Wai made the fist over gesture and bowed deeply to her. He and the remaining Dao Fei, mostly survivors of the massacred King Shens, faded away into the fields. Oh yeah, we don't know if he died though. They just said that Ma carried his body, but we don't really know if he's dead or not. I'm guessing no. But we'll never know. Well, we don't know yet. Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna assume right away that he died. Though, judging by how high up they were, I can assume they were very high up. But we will see either in the coming chapters or in the next book. Okay. He and the remaining Dao Fei, mostly survivors of the massacred King Shens, faded away into the fields. Kyoshi looked around for her friends and couldn't see them. Are you, still possessed? She heard Lex say, his voice muffled as if speaking through a porthole. Or are you you again? Will you please just show yourselves? She snapped. There was a grinding noise as they rose into view. Wong had bent them a shelter to hide in below the surface, the same way Jianzu had survived when she first lost control and entered the Avatar state. She wanted to tell them that this time she hadn't gone berserk. She'd been fully aware of her powers, heightening with whatever vast reserves of energy the Avatar had access to. She'd been fully aware of killing Zhu. Okay, but that's her thinking that she killed Zhu. I'm still not entirely convinced she killed Zhu. Or that Zhu died. I think he's still alive somehow. But she thinks she killed him. But I don't know. I don't know, man. Unless they say nothing else in this book or the next book, then I will believe that he is actually Dunzo. She'd been fully aware of killing Zhu. If Rinky wanted to embrace her... Oh god. I don't think I would wait another you for a third book. That's like too much. I'm glad I read this book when the next book was like... when the second book was coming out soon. Sorry, it's my eczema flaring up again. There's like periods where my fingers will feel like really, really like hot. Alright. If Frankie wanted to embrace her, she restrained herself. Yeah, if Frankie wanted to embrace her, she restrained herself well. She and the others stood before Kyoshi, stiff and hesitant. They'd known her, had gotten accustomed to the idea that their inexperienced friend could bend all four elements, but they hadn't really seen the Avatar before, until now. Don't do this, Kyoshi said. Please, if you act like this, I won't be able to. Her knees buckled. Not this time, she thought to herself. Stay awake. Be present for what you have done. Look at your actions instead of turning away. Kyoshi, your hands! Rangi said, aghast. She held them in front of her face. They were riddled with burns from where the lightning had struck her fans. We have to get her to a healer, Karima shouted, her sharp face already losing its edges as Kyoshi's vision blurred. Kyoshi! Lex said, suddenly close to her, propping her up as best he could from underneath her arm. The last person among them who should have tried to hold her up physically. Kyoshi! She lasted less than 2 minutes before succumbing to the pain. And that is the end of that chapter. And now I will start the next. This one is called Memories. Oh, it's a pretty short chapter. Memories. They brought her back to Xi'an. The other details were less clear. At first, Kyoshi had tried to refuse the medication thrust upon her while she writhed on a wooden bed in some dark building. She remembered the heady sweet state that Jianzhu had put her in before summoning a horror from the deep, before murdering Yoon, and she resisted any attempts to cloud her awareness. But then her hands betrayed her by sending waves of blanketing, enveloping agony into the rest of her body. Her resolve broke, and she gulped bitter concoctions from wooden bowls without questioning their source. The medicine split her mind from the pain like she'd cut off his palace from the Dao Fei. The injury was still there, gnawing its teeth, but she could watch it from a distance. The images after that came in the acts of a play. Wong fussing over the sunlight and the furniture in her room, unable to do anything else. Rangi curled up into a miserable ball. Many times there was an old Earth Kingdom woman Kyoshi didn't recognize, her wrinkled head floating atop a cloud of voluminous skirts. She guided Karima into her amateurish water healing by referring to medical charts, pointing out where over Kyoshi's scorched hands the cooling water should be directed. The lack of confidence, the worry in Karima's face during these sessions was endearing. After some time had passed, she felt the most recent dose of medicine fade away, without feeling the screaming need for more. Clarity infiltrated her skull again. Her thoughts were able to focus on the only person in the room. The rest of the group taking a rest shift. The wheel had spun and landed on Lek. "You're here?" she said. Her tongue was fuzzy in her mouth. "Good to see you too, you giant jerk." He sat in a nice chair that didn't belong. By her best guess, this room was in the abandoned part of the zone, and had been set up as a makeshift hospital. An herbalist's cabinet with many small drawers had been lugged in, drawing tracks of dust in the floor. "How long has it been?" This is either a typo or this is how she's talking. Because it says, how long has it been? So maybe that's her talking like mumbled, or maybe that's a typo. Either way, that's cool. Well, if it's a typo, then that's cool. I found another typo, guys. But I think that's just how it might be. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. It would be a good typo, though. Because all it's missing is an H. But yes. How long has it been? Maybe it's a typo. Maybe. How long has it been? Only 3 days or so. Like flips through a textbook of acupuncture points. Kyoshi had the suspicion he was looking for anatomical illustrations. Anatomical, yeah. Kyoshi had the suspicion he was looking for anatomical illustrations. You're recovering fast. We got lucky. Mr. Song is one of the best burn doctors in the Earth Kingdom. She lives down the street a couple of blocks. That must have been the old woman who popped in and out of Kyoshi's walking dreams. Then what's she doing in a place like Zigon? Skilled doctors were high in demand and more likely to be held inside the walls of manors like Tez. It seemed like Kyoshi would never be able to get more than a handful of questions. Hold on. It seemed like Kyoshi would never be able to get more than a handful of sentences out without making Lek angry. Trying to make a home, he said, misinterpreting her surprise as disdain. Getting caught in place while her village changes and decays around her. He got up in a huff. I'll go get Ranky. You can have someone worth talking to. Lek, wait. They'd gone on too long as misguided rivals. She decided not to let her parents have any more hold over her life, and that started by being civil with the boy they'd chosen to spend their last 2 years with instead of her. He actually listened this time, crossing his arms and waiting. Wasn't expecting that. Kyoshi found herself at a loss for words. They had nothing to formally apologize to each other for. Yeah, they had nothing to formally apologize to each other over. She ran through a list of things to say. You're really good at throwing rocks, she blurted out. How articulate. If her hands weren't mittened in bandages, she would have bit her nails. She had no choice but to invest further. What I mean is, you saved me back at his palace, and I never had the chance to thank you. You were incredible back there. How did you learn to shoot like that? She hoped the flattery, which was completely genuine and deserved as far as she was concerned, would make him smile. Instead, his face grew old before her eyes. He tossed the book aside. Do you know what a gibbet is? He said after a hefty pause. Kyoshi shook her head. It's a form of punishment the lawmen use over by the Siwang Desert, he said. They hang you in a cage, high up on display as a warning to other criminals. During the dry season, it's a death sentence. You can't last more than a couple of days until thirst takes you. Lek, I didn't mean to dig up... No, he said gently, raising his hand. For once, he wasn't angry with her. You should know. He sank back into the chair, throwing his legs over the armrest, and stared out the window. I was living in the streets of Date Grove, a settlement near the Misty Palms Oasis. My brother, he wasn't my family by blood. He was my friend. He was my friend. We'd sworn to each other. We were copying the tough guys and swordsmen who came in and out of town looking for work. A regular gang of two, we were ruling our patch of gutter. No wonder she and Lek didn't get along. They shared too much, had the same stink. What was his name? She asked. Chen, Lek said. He bounced his foot, the chair squeaking with emotion. One day, Chen got caught stealing some rotting lychee nuts. We've done it hundreds of times before, sometimes in broad daylight. The townsfolk never cared, until one day they did. Enough to put Chen in a gibbet. The shaking of his foot grew faster. It might have been a new governor trying to throw his weight around, or maybe the villagers got sick of us. They clapped him in those bars before he knew what was happening. Lek, Kyoshi said. She couldn't offer him anything but the sound of his name. I held out hope, though, he said with a little hiccup. You see, the gibbet was old and rusty. It had a weak hinge, or so I spotted. I gathered every rock I could find and threw them as hard as I could at that weak point, trying to bring the cage down. The villagers, the abiders, they laughed at me the whole time, especially when I missed. I could have knocked a few of their teeth out, but it never occurred to me. I couldn't waste a single stone. After a few days, Jessa and Hark found me passed out under that gibbet. Chen must have died before they got there, because when I woke up on Long Yin's back as we flew away, I couldn't use my arm for 2 weeks afterward. My shoulder and elbow were so swollen. Lex swung his legs off the chair, unable to stay in the same position lest the memory catch up with him. The funny thing is, Date Grove doesn't exist anymore. It was running out of water on its last legs while I was there. It's been swallowed by the desert. The people of the town killed my brother to uphold the law, and it meant nothing in the end. If the law was there to protect the village, and the village didn't survive, then what did they gain? I've always wondered if those people felt satisfied about condemning that one boy that one time while they fled the soundstorm that buried their houses. Lex said. I always hoped Chen's death was worth it to someone. Kyoshi bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood. So anyway, Jessa and Hark saved me. I learned how to earthbend, and I swore an oath that I'd never miss a target again. Lex said. That's how I'm so good at throwing rocks. There wasn't a right response. The right response was undoing, going back, reweaving fate to arrive at a different outcome than him or her in this room. Lex smiled half-heartedly at her silence. Did you ever consider that your parents might have left you where they did so you wouldn't have to live that kind of life? He asked. That maybe they were protecting you? The notion had crossed her mind, but she'd never given it the credence until now. The way I figure it, Jessa and Hark assumed the biters could treat you better than they could, Lex said, as he wiped his nose. You were their blood. Priceless. Me? I was useful. As good as the next kid with fast hands, and just as replaceable. I sufficed. Lex. She thought about what truth she could tell him in return. I believe, as usual, you're wrong. Kyoshi spotted the twitch in the corner of his mouth. And I'm glad that if my parents couldn't be with me, they were with you, she added. A long time passed before Lek sighed and got to his feet. I'll tell Rengi you're up and coherent. He paused by the door. His expression turned hesitant. Do you think once things settle down, I might have a chance with her? Kyoshi stared at him in astonishment. Lek held her gaze as long as he could. Then he burst into laughter. Your face, he cackled. You should see your... Oh, that has to be the face you make in your Avatar portrait, bug-eyed and furious. And to think they shared a moment. Go soak your head, Lek, she snapped. Sure thing, sister, or else you'll do it for me? He waved his hands in mockery of waterbending and made a drowning noise as he left the room. Kyoshi's cheeks heated in frustration, and then, like a glacier cracking, they slowly melted into a grin. She noticed what he'd called her for the first time. And that is the end of that chapter. Alright. Alright, on to the next chapter. If I continue for like the next 2 hours, I think I will finish this book. I am not kidding. Wow. Okay. I don't want to jinx that. I know, right? Alright. Hold on. I just gotta put some chapstick on, and I need to get some water in my system. Okay. Okay. So the next chapter is called The Ambush. The Ambush. In Gianzi's opinion, it was good to be home in Yokoya, no matter how many awkward questions the staff had about the team he'd left with. Where were Saifu and the others? What happened to them? Are they okay? Dead in the line of duty. Daofei ambush. And no. By definition, no. By definition, no. He owed Heiran better answers, though. Not only did the lie go a level deeper with her, he needed her input. After shutting the doors of his study on the faces of his troubled servants, he dumped his missed correspondence on his desk while she sat on the couch. The trail went cold in Taihua, and we lost the Shirsha. The Shirshu. And we lost the Shirshu, he said. He knifed a wax seal off a mail cylinder. Hold on. Actually, I'm gonna plug in my laptop right now. because it's looking a little low. Excuse me. Alrighty. Yeah, the trail went cold in Taiwan, and we lost the Shirshu, he said. He knifed a wax seal off a mail cylinder. But that's why we have the mated pair, isn't it? Redundancy, the key to success. Jianzu, Heiran said. She seemed a little cold and withdrawn, sitting on his couch. Ba Sing Se is near Taihua. The letter was from that brat Ted. I'll bet they're somewhere safe behind the walls. I'll have to round up my contacts in all 3 rings. Jianzu! He looked up from the scroll. Stop, she said. It's over. He looked at her carefully. There were several ways in which it could be over. It depended on what she knew. He waited for her to continue. I kept an eye on Hui's movements while you were gone, Heiran said. A little more than a week ago, there was an explosion of activity coming from his offices. Letters, messengers, gold and silver being transferred. Just got a little something in my throat. It's not the Rona, though. Don't think it's the Rona, because it's not. Don't update now, Windows. Please don't update now. Update later. Yeah, a little more than a week ago. That would have been Saifu's message arriving in Hui's hands. Hui's understanding would be the partial truth, that the Avatar might have been taken by Dao Fei. But he still thought Yoon was the real deal. Heiran knew the girl was the true Avatar, but the results of the tracking mission and the outlaw settlement Heiran knew the girl was the true Avatar, but not the results of the tracking mission and the outlaw settlement in the mountains. One had the latest news, the other more accurate news. He had to mind the asymmetry. Hui is acting on the information you gave him at the party, Heiran said. He's building a case with the other sages to take the Avatar away from you. If he's made this much progress based solely on Yoon having a falling out with you, how do you think people will react to learning about Kyoshi? So far, that revelation had not gone well for anyone who'd heard it. How do you think we should respond? Heiran curled up on the couch, hugging her knees. She looked so young when she did that. I don't want to respond, she said. I want to tell Hui and the sages the truth so they can help us extend the search. Jianzu, I don't care about the Avatar anymore. I want my daughter back. He was surprised at her lack of endurance. As far as she knew, her daughter and the Avatar weren't in any particular danger. I mean, yeah, they are. Guys, don't think it's the Rona. I'm still making reading videos. I it's the 16th of July right now. So I'm healthy technically. All right. But they don't know. Well, they have been provoking danger. They provoke danger with fucking Mock and then with Zhu. They're in a dangerous situation. Well, Kyoshi is in a kind of dangerous situation. Okay, hold on. Let me put more of my cream I have for my sickness. I hate when I have to put it like in between my fingers and I have to rub them. It's like the worst. And then I feel like a nice, pleasant tingling sensation, and I'm just like, ah, yes, the cream is working. Because I don't feel like it's itchy or like, I still feel it's hot, but not like super hot. So I'm just like, ah, yes, it's working. Yeah, thank God for fucking lotion that's designed to help with eczema. Thank God. Okay, back to the story. Yes. She was surprised at her lack of endurance. As far as she knew, her daughter and the Avatar weren't in any particular danger. Of course, the reality was that they were Of course, the reality was that they absolutely were, if they were in the hands of outlaws. But Heiran didn't know that. Jianzu sighed. Her daughter would never come back without the Avatar. The Avatar would never come back without what exactly? The wheels spun in his head. This was exhausting. Maybe you're right, Jianzu said. Maybe it is over. This farce has gone on for too long. Heiran looked up hopefully. You said Hui started his moves a week ago. Jianzu scratched the underside of his chin. There was a scab there from where Seifel's blade had nicked him. It'll take him at least another 2 weeks to send missives and get responses from all the sages who matter in the Earth Kingdom. They'll gather in Gaoling or Omashu, and then summon me to answer for my mistakes. That's another week. That's plenty of time to ready a statement of truth. He shrugged. We may even find Kyoshi before then. The facts will come out immediately in that case. I'd lose the Avatar, but you'd be reunited with your daughter. Heiran was heartened. She got up and placed a hand on Jianzu's unshaven cheek, stroking him gently with her thumb. Thank you, she whispered. I know what you're sacrificing. Thank you. He leaned into her hand, pressing it briefly to his face, and smiled at her. I have a lot of unopened mail to get through. The smile vanished as the door to his study closed. Alone, he picked up Tez's letter again. He'd been right not to give Heiran the full story. He'd always been by himself in this game. The message from the boy governor was written in a sloppy, rushed hand, devoid of the flourishes that normally came with high-level correspondence. The only authentication was the personal seal, which officials kept on their person at all times. It was as if Te had written it from somewhere other than his palace, and while in great distress. First, At first, Jianzhu had been against installing such a young governor from a family with a history of corruption, but had eventually found it useful the way the impressionable child looked up to him. He could pretty much get Ted to do anything, including reporting threats to the Earth Kingdom to him first before warning the other sages. Like now. The scroll crumpled up in Jianzhu's hands as he read about Xu Ping An's jailbreak. His veins threatened to burst from his flesh and skitter away. Against every inclination, Jianzhu had kept the leader of the Yellownecks alive as a favor to his Fire Nation allies, so they could study how the man was capable of bending lightning. Ah! It was a skill so rare that some thought it was a folktale or a secret that had been lost to the ages. Either way, it made Xu a valuable, dangerous specimen, and Te, who owned one of the most defensible prisons in the region, had managed to let him escape. Jianzhu furiously scanned Te's account on the events, fully expecting to keel over and die from anger. Instead, farther down the page, he found salvation. There had also been an attempt on Te's life, the letter went on, as if Te weren't eminently replaceable. The two assassins had almost killed him, but at the last minute decided to show mercy. An old man, whose description Jianzhu didn't recognize, and a girl. The tallest girl that Te had ever seen. And unless panic addled his mind, he'd seen her bend earth and air. Jianzhu leaned back in his chair. He ignored the superfluous details that ended the letter. Something about painted faces and how Ted needed to end the cycle of grifting that his family had been so deeply ensconced in, could Master Jianzhu spare a few lessons in wiser governance and blah blah blah. The Avatar was alive. Relief washed over him like ice water. But what on earth was she doing? She had left Taiwan and reached Ted's palace before the full moon, which meant moving at a reasonable pace. Her actions didn't sound like those of a captive. Jianzhu let the question go unanswered while he opened another letter. This one was from a prefectural captain in Yaosheng, a territory that bordered Tez. The lawmen had captured a handful of Dao Fei, scared witless, with an unbelievable story. Their leader. Okay. Shoot, what's the right word? Fuck, I just had it. This confirms this part. The lawmen held captives. The lawmen had captured a handful of Dao Fei, scared witless, with an unbelievable story. Their leader, Xu Ping An, had been murdered by a spirit with glowing eyes, drenched in blood and white ashes, who had carried Xu into the sky before sucking the life-giving flame out of his body and consuming it for herself. The captain thought that the dreaded Xu Ping An had died years ago at Zulu Pass. As the esteemed sage who who defeated the loathsome Dao Fei leader. Did Jianzu have any information that might shed light on the situation? Glowing eyes. So that confirms that, okay, he's dead. I still have suspicions, but they say this is the captive's point of view that she killed him. But why would they drag his body if he were dead? I don't know. I guess it's brotherhood and stuff like that. I get that. But this kind of confirms that he is dead until proven otherwise. Glowing eyes, Jianzu thought. He'd seen those eyes close up before and nearly lost his life. He made a quick mental map of Yao Sheng and found that the fleeing bandits could very well have seen the Avatar between Tez Palace and Zigon Village. All right then. Things were looking up. With some slight adjustments, he'd have the Avatar back under his roof. He didn't understand what she was doing or why, but he didn't care to. He had her location, and he had time. It wasn't until the next morning he found he had run fresh out of the ladder. One thing he and Heiran had gotten good at in their younger days was talking to each other through fake smiles and laughter. It had come in handy when they had to maintain a front during gatherings of high-ranking officials, while Karuk dozed off the previous night's revelries or made eyes at pretty delegates. Jianzu stood in front of his gate. His feet wet with morning dew, and waved happily at the approaching caravan that was emblazoned with the Beifong flying boar. "Did you know about this?" he said to Heiran. He thought his teeth might crack from frustration. "I swear I did not." Heiran was as angry as him. Heiran was as angry at him as he was at her. "I thought you said we would have weeks." It should have been that long. How the Earth Avatar was taught was solely up to his or her master. To revoke that bond required a conclave of Earth Kingdom sages. Gathering a sufficient number of them from across the continent should have taken as long as they discussed the day before, if not longer. And yet, judging by the size of the caravan and the banners that flew from the tops of the coaches, Hui had pulled together enough heads seemingly overnight. He had to have been preparing his power grab since before the incident in Taiwan. He'd underestimated the Chamberlain, taken the man at face value instead of considering what depths lay beneath. The lead coach pulled up to the gate of the manor and came to a stop. The bore of the doors split open to reveal Hui, who'd traveled alone. "Chamberlain!" Jianzu said with a boisterous smile. "What a delightful surprise!" Jianzu wanted to reach out and throttle him in full view of the rest of the caravan. He might have been forgiven, Avatar business or no. Showing up unannounced was as rude as it was in any other circumstance. "Is Liu Beifong with you?" "Master Jianzu," Hui said grimly. Headmistress? I wish I could say I was here under more pleasant circumstances. Liu Beifong will not be joining us. Jianzu noticed Hui didn't say whether or not he had the old man's approval for this action. He watched the other sages step out of their coaches and tallied who'd come. herbalist Pan from Taku, carrying his pet cat in his arms. General Sayuk, the Lord Commander of Dorhuan Fortress, another political appointee like Te, who was vastly underqualified to lead that stronghold. Sage Ryong of Pohoi, spirits above, Jianzu thought. Had Hui simply scavenged the entire northwestern coast of of the Earth Kingdom for allies? It might have been the case. There was no one from Omashi or Gaoling or Ba Sing Se, where Jianzu's support was the strongest. Hui had handpicked the attendees for the surprise conclave, sages he could influence. Promises and vast sums of money must have flowed like water leading up to today. Shang Dako was here too, Jianzu noted dryly. No Shang was worth his salt. Okay, never mind. Yeah. No Zhang worth his salt would pass up an opportunity to humiliate Ganjin. Their numbers were surprising. He hadn't realized these many sages fell outside his sphere of influence. Perhaps about a fifth of the most important people in the Earth Kingdom had arrived on his doorstep with hostile intent. Well, he said, cheerfully, smacking his hands together. Let's get you all inside and refreshed. The staff was aflutter. They hadn't had any warnings that guests were coming. The dire nature of their short notice was made more apparent by Jianzu entering the kitchen and personally overseeing the preparations. Nay, helping with them. Everyone calm down, he said reassuringly as he hoisted a massive kettle onto the stove himself. You don't have to pull out your finest work. It's not your fault. There simply isn't time. But masters, so many of your peers at once, Auntie Mui said, near tears. It'd be shameful to give lesser service. We have to line up a midday meal and dinner, and oh, there's not nearly enough firewood. Jianzu opened the kettle lid and peered inside to check the water level before turning around and laying his hands on the woman's shoulders. My dear, he said, looking into her eye. They're here on business. I doubt you'll have to feed many, or any of them. Concentrate on getting the tea ready. That is all. Mui turned redder. Of course, master, she stuttered. It would be impossible to discuss important matters without tea. She bustled off to yell at the servants in charge of the tea selection. Jianzu dusted his hands off carefully and gave a weary sigh. Jianzu entered the grand reception hall into a trying sight. The sages had seated themselves across three sides of the room, behind the rows of long tables, and Hui was in the middle where the master of the house would normally be. He was sitting in Jianzu's chair. Heiran was off to his left. She traded a wide-eyed glance with him. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What Jianzu was going to do was sit down. Oh, yeah. And then sitting in the big boy chair in the fucking, where the host should be sitting. That's another power move right there. You know they mean business too. Oh yeah, definitely. What Jianzu was going to do was sit down, alone, behind the remaining table, and wait. He felt stares burning into him from all directions. Master Jianzu, Hui said, could you ask Mr. Kelsang and the Avatar to join us? The servants opened the door and entered with steaming trays of tea. Fug! No. Right? Fuck. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, he's about to get his ass whooped. In a political way. Where was I? Master Jianzu, Hui said, could you ask Master Kelsang and the Avatar to join us? The servants opened the door and entered with steaming trays of tea. Jianzu milked the moment for all it was worth, waiting to answer until each sage had a cup placed before them. He made motions of thanks to the maid who gave him his, and took a sip, praising Aunt Mui's choice of the blended oolong. Only once the staff had left did he speak. You know well as I do. You know as well as I do, I cannot. Let me say that again. You know as well as I do, I cannot. Master Kelsang and the Avatar are still on their spiritual journey. Hui smiled tightly, a motion that pulled his blocky face to the side. Yes, their journey. The abbots of the air temples haven't seen them once since you made that claim. Is it not strange that Master Kelsang hasn't taken the boy to any of the temples, whether to visit the sacred sites or simply to resupply? I don't wish to speak ill of my friend. I don't wish to speak ill of my friend, but he does have a rocky relationship with some of the more orthodox air temple leaders. The places holy to the air nomads exist around the world. They're nomads. Then what holy places are in Taihua? Hui snapped. Perhaps the previously unknown settlement of Dao Fei there? Jianzu stayed calmed. Chamberlain, what are you saying? What are you saying? I'm saying that the Avatar's last known whereabouts happened to be in a nest of criminals, traitors, and outlaws, and that he hasn't been seen since. I'm saying that we have to assume the worst, and he and his companion are in mortal danger, if not dead already. There was the clank of a single dropped cup. Heron knew he'd tracked the Avatar to Taihua, but not that the mountains had been crawling with danger, nor had any of the letters he'd read last night mentioned a firebending girl. The fate of her daughter was unknown. Heiran looked at him like he'd stabbed her in the heart. That was the one gaze he couldn't meet. He concentrated on Hui instead, on this usurping. He concentrated on Hui instead, on this usurping. Okay. I keep wanting to say usurping, but it's usurping. He concentrated on Hui instead, on this usurping little badger frog. Yeah, he concentrated on Hui instead, on this usurping little badger frog who'd fancied himself a player of games. Usurping. Oh. Yeah, that. Usurping. Yeah, I had trouble with this word, and now I'm having trouble with it again. Okay. Usurping. Okay. I forgot. Yeah, he concentrated on Hui instead. On this usurping little badger frog who fancied himself a player of games. Strictly speaking, Hui didn't have evidence in hand, but he could get it at his leisure. There was no hiding an entire town, nor the secret tunnels that it supplied. Excuse me. Yeah, yeah, strictly speaking, Hui didn't have evidence in hand, but he could get it at his leisure. There was no hiding an entire town, nor the secret tunnels that it supplied. You have demonstrated unforgivable negligence at best, and cost the Earth Kingdom its portion of the Avatar cycle at worst, he said. Hui said. And the people I've bribed to appear today will attest to that. You are no longer fit to serve as the Avatar's master. He'd chosen to use those words. Jiantu snapped. And you are? He shouted at Hui, leaping to his feet. You who want that power and status for no reason other than it's there? Hui took the whole time to smell and sip his tea, knowing he'd won. This gathering has not yet decided whom the Avatar, if still alive, should learn from, he said smugly. Jianzu felt queasy. His forehead grew damp. This gathering? He sneered, swaying on his feet. This isn't a proper conclave of sages. You've identified my enemies among the leadership of the Earth Kingdom and brought them to my doorstep like a bandit gang. What has he promised you, huh? He yelled at the assembled faces, nearly spinning in place. Money? Power? For centuries, men like... Money? Power? For centuries, men like Hui have carved up this nation and offered slices to anyone who will pay. I'm the one trying to make it stronger. They blinked slowly, coughed hard, didn't respond. Hui sniffed, his nose starting to run. Yeah, Hui sniffed, his nose starting to run. We meet the minimum number required to strip you of your duties. If you're done grandstanding, we'll take the vote. Jianzu retched. His insides heaved in and out, and his vision went blurry. What is going on? He shouted at Hui. What did you do to me? What did you do to me? What do you mean? Hui tried to stand, but... Wait, hold on. Yeah. What did you do to me? What do you mean? Hui tried to stand but collapsed back in his chair. He put his hand on his nose in astonishment. It was covered in blood. What's happening? Someone shouted. Sounds of vomiting filled the hall. A servant opened the door behind Jianzu to see what the commotion was and screamed. Jianzu collapsed forward, his upper body slamming against the table. He couldn't see Haran, but like the needle of a compass, his hand reached toward her as he blacked out. And that is the end of that chapter. So I'm just like, did the whole staff poison him, or what is going on? I wonder. I think this will be the last chapter I read. Like I said I would. Hold on just 1 second though. I will be right back. Okay, I am back. Hold on. I went to the bathroom, so that means I had to wash my hands. Now I need to put more of my lotion on. I'm glad I got the Aveeno one. Okay. Yeah, it's like a nice tingling sensation. Whoa. That's awesome. Okay. There we go. Alright. So, on into the next chapter. Okay. So the next chapter is called Farewells. Farewells. Kyoshi gave a start when Laogu walked into the room, alone. She immediately took a defensive posture in her bed on the chance he'd belatedly come to exact a toll for denying him a victim. He didn't help matters by brandishing a small blade as he entered. "Time to get the bandages off," he said. "Why are you the one doing it?" I can be convincing when I need to be," he said. He sat down next to her bed and gently applied the knife to the cotton wrappings on her left arm. There was a rasp of the sharp edge on the cloth, of fibers giving way. There was a rasp of the sharp edge on the cloth, of fibers giving way, that made her shiver. "You looked lost in thought when I came in," Laogu said. "Are you regretting killing Zhu?" He pierced the first layer, and she contemplated screaming for help. "No," she said. "I feel bad for letting Ted live." Laogu gave her an exasperated look and wagged the knife. "You know, we can rectify that pretty easily." "That's not what I mean. I told you. I accepted the responsibility of saving him, and I'm not turning back on my choice." She rolled her lips between her teeth. "It's more like I feel inconsistent, unfair. Like I should have either killed them both or let them both live." Laogu started rolling the severed end of the bandage into a round bale. "A general sends some troops to die in a siege and holds others back in reserve. A king taxes half his lands to support the other. A mother has one dose of medicine and 2 sick children. I wouldn't call your situation a particularly I wouldn't call your situation a particularly exalted one. Her mentor always her mentor had a way of cutting her down to size. People of all walks, high and low, choose to hurt some and help others, he said. I can tell you it'll only get worse the more you embrace your avatarhood. Worse? She said. Shouldn't it become easier over time? Oh no, my dear girl. And it'll never get easier. If you had a strict rule, maybe, to always show mercy or always punish, you could use it as a shield to protect your spirit. But that should be distant. But that would be But that would be distancing yourself from your duty. Determining the fates of others on a case-by-case basis, considering the infinite combinations of circumstances, will worry you on like rain on the mountain. Give it enough time, and you'll bear the scars. He spoke out of kindness and sorrow, perhaps not as immutable as he claimed to be. You will never be perfectly fair, and you will never be truly correct, Lao Gu said. This is your burden. To keep deciding over and over again, Kyoshi didn't know if she could take the strain. Lao Gu started on her other arm. What I'm curious about is what you'll do next, he said. Do you feel strong enough to take your man now? Do you feel strong enough to take your man now? Kyoshi was distracted by the smell coming from her unwashed hand. What? The old man tut-tutted. Some seeker of vengeance you are. Your quest, your ultimate goal. You defeated the same enemy Jianzu did. Do you feel strong enough to take him down now? Kyoshi hadn't thought about her fight with Shu in those terms, but the leader of the Yellownecks might be a yardstick to measure herself against Jianzu by. It seemed like an oversimplification, and yet she didn't have an answer to give him. She didn't give him an answer. Lao Gu finished unwinding her second arm. She flexed her pale and wrinkled fingers. The pain was gone, but her hands were mottled and shiny, missing their lines and prints in some areas. Go, Lao Gu said. See your friends. I have some business to take care on my own. Don't kill Te, Kyoshi said. She was pretty sure the boy had ridden to safety, out of reach of Tigui, the immortal, but it was worth mentioning anyway. Not after I went through the trouble. Lao Gu made an innocent face and pocketed the knife he'd been using. I mean it! I mean it, she yelled. Kyoshi washed her hands in a basin and went into the next room. The Flying Opera Company had been sleeping there, the bedrolls laid out on the empty floor. Rangi and Lek were the only members present, playing a game of pai show that Lek scrutinized with intense concentration, and Rangi looked bored with. Judging by the layout of the pieces she'd been toying with him, making blunders on purpose. She glanced up and gave Kyoshi a smile that could melt the poles. You're on your feet again. I've been off them too long, Kyoshi said. She inherited the group's need for safety and motion. I didn't feel right staying in the same town for so many days. I don't feel right staying in the same town for so many days straight. The rest of us agreed we weren't going anywhere until you were 100% better. Lex said. Kyoshi, you took a lot of lightning bolts. Honestly, I don't know how you're alive. He turned to Rengi like it was her fault for not knowing what Ju was. I mean, I've never met a firebender other than you. Is that some kind of dirty trick you people pull out to win Agni Kois or whatever? No, Rengi protested. Bending lightning is a skill so rare that there are barely any living witnesses who can confirm it exists. And the reports don't mention Ju was from the Fire Nation at all. Do you think I'd let Kyoshi walk into a fight without her telling everything I knew about her opponent? Kyoshi watched them argue over Ju's secret technique. She hadn't noticed his eye color. But then, not every firebender has blatantly gold irises. If there was anything she'd learned recently, it was that the Dao Fei Brotherhood didn't require blood ties. Mach and Y could have sworn to Ju without being related to him. A firebender had ended up the leader of a gang of Earth Kingdom outlaws. It was no different than a disgraced air nomad doing the same. Perhaps her mixed parentage made her understand such outcomes were less rare than people assumed. Oh, Kyoshi, Rengi cried with sudden dismay. Your hands! They'd been the first injuries she'd noticed after the duel as well. Kyoshi held them up to show they'd healed. They feel fine. But the scars! Rengi entwined her fingers with Kyoshi's and brought them to her cheek. Kyoshi was glad she'd washed thoroughly. You had such beautiful hands, Rengi said, nuzzling at her palm. Your skin was so smooth and... Lek coughed loudly. I have an idea for that. Come on, lovebirds. Let's go shopping. Zigan hadn't been particularly friendly to strangers the first time they'd entered to buy food. Now, in the light of a new day, it was worse. The townsfolk stared at her with fear and hostility rather than plain rudeness of before. Doors and shutters slammed closed as they walked by. Residents who couldn't afford such nice entrances vigorously shook their hanging rugs and curtains for emphasis. Hold on just 1 second. Residents who couldn't afford such nice entrances vigorously shook their hanging rugs and curtains for emphasis. Do I still have paint on my face? Kyoshi said. Why are they looking at us like that? Yeah, why are they looking at us like that? Well, for starters, a lot of Zigon saw flashes of lightning and a pillar of wind and fire from your duel with Ju, Lex said. And then some of the Dao Fei passed through town as they fled, telling stories of a giant with eyes of blood who drank the soul of their leader. These idiots haven't necessarily put together that you're the Avatar. I heard one I heard one shopkeeper say you were a dragon human form, which explained why you could fly and breathe fire. But I saved them from the Yellownecks. Lek laughed. Kyoshi, by a strict interpretation of the code, you are the leader of the Yellowneck. You are now the leader of the Yellownecks. Dr. Song's no dummy, and it took a lot of begging to get her to think about helping you. She saw a Dao Fei girl who challenged her elder brother for control of their gang and won. Face it, sister, you are dangerous. Kyoshi was surprised at how much it irked her. The first heroic, selfless feat she performed as the Avatar, and it was tainted. The context had already crumbled away, leaving her no better than Tagaka, the pirate queen. But then, hadn't she understood this from the very beginning? Her legacy was part of the cost she'd been willing to pay to bring Jianzu to justice. It always had been. It was simply a higher price than she'd anticipated. That was the story she repeated to herself as Lek led them inside a cramped shop. A brush of a hand against her face made her squeak. It was a glove, dangling limply from a hook on the ceiling. An old man as dried and stretched as the skins he sold sat on the floor. He nodded at each of them, without fear or disdain of the other villagers. Kyoshi thought she knew why. Leather workers and tanners, peasants who made their living by crafting products from animals, were considered unclean in many portions of the Earth Kingdom. It was part of the hypocrisy that Kyoshi hated so much. People from all rungs of society depended on and clamored for such goods, but despised their neighbors who made them. She remembered the fine boots Yoon had worn that day, back in the manor, and her heart ached for him. "We're looking for a pair of gloves for my friend," Lek said. "They'll have to be big, of course." The shopkeeper gestured at one wall where the largest examples hung. Kyoshi pressed her hand against the glove at the very end of the row and shook her head. "I got one or two more, bigger in the back," the old man said unhurriedly. "But they'd be no good for regular wear. Not unless you figure on fighting a battle every day." "I think," Kyoshi said, "we should give them a shot." He shuffled around, staying seated, and rummaged in a pile. The back of the shop was simply whatever was behind him. He produced a cracked hide bag and pulled apart the drawstring. "Made these for a colonel on the rise in the army a long time ago," he said. "Poor fellow died before he could pick them up." The gloves were more like gauntlets. The thick, supple leather fastened to gleaming metal bracers that protected the wrists. Kyoshi pulled them on and buckled the straps. The fingers were snug, a second skin, and the armored portions heavy and reassuring. There was no way these gloves would be acceptable in polite company. Their very appearance was aggressive, a declaration of war. "They're perfect," Kyoshi said. "What do we owe you?" "Take 'em," the shopkeeper said. "Consider it a gift for what you did." He elaborated no further. Kyoshi bowed deeply before they left the shop, grateful to the core. There was at last one person who saw the truth. They walked down the street in high spirits. Kyoshi pulled one of her fans out and levitated a pebble. She could bend perfectly with her new gloves. If only it were this easy to find shoes that fit, she grumbled. It's better than being short and skinny, Lex said morosely. If I was your size, I'd be ruling my own nation by now. Ranky laughed and squeezed his arm. Aw, cheer up, Lek, she said. She prodded his bicep, working her way higher. You'll fill out soon. You have good bone structure. Lek turned a deeper red than the face paint they wore on the raid. Cut it out, he said. It's not funny when... Ah! Ranky had suddenly yanked him downward by the arm. Her knees dragged in the dirt. It was as if her entire body had gone limp. What? She mumbled, her eyelids beating like insect wings. Lek yelped again and swatted at the small of his back. As he spun in place, Kyoshi saw a tuft of down sticking out from him. Sleeping darts? Hold on, let me read it again. Oh. Okay. I see why you're saying that. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. Yeah, Lek yelped again and swatted at the small of his back. As he spun in place, Kyoshi saw a tuft of down sticking out of him. The fletching of a dart. She instinctively brought her hands in front of her face and heard sharp metal planks bouncing off her bracers. But the back of her neck was uncovered, and a stinging burn landed on her skin there. The sensation of liquid spread over her body. Poison. Her mind screamed as her muscles went slack. Lek tried to ready his stone to hurl at their attackers, but it fell out of his hands and rolled on the ground. Yeah, hold on. He and Kyoshi collapsed on their faces like the Daofei who'd been latched by the Shirshu. It was different from the incense Jianzu had drugged her with. She could still see and think, but the poison was having different reactions in her friends. Ranky seemed barely conscious, and Lek began to gag and choke. Feet ran over them. Pairs of hands quickly grabbed Rangi and dragged her away. Just Rangi. Kyoshi tried to shout and scream, but the poison had its strong... Kyoshi tried to shout and scream, but the poison had its strongest grip on her neck, where it had first entered her body. Her lungs forced out air, but her voice box added no sound. She could see Lek. His face turned red and puffy. He clutched at his swollen throat. He was having some kind of reaction. He couldn't breathe. Tears streamed down Kyoshi's face as she lay inches away, helpless, unable to save another boy from Jianzu's venoms. The dust turned muddy under her eye. It was nearly half an hour before she could crawl over to Lek and check for a heartbeat. Okay. Let me read that again. Tears streamed down Kyoshi's face as she lay inches away, helpless, unable to save another boy from Jianzu's venoms. The dust turned muddy under her eyes. It was nearly half an hour before she could crawl over to Lek and check for a heartbeat that wasn't there. She arrived at their building at the same time as Lao Gu, Wong, and Karima. They saw Lek's body in her arms and reeled like they'd been struck. Wong crumpled to the ground and began to sob, his low moan shaking the earth. Lao Gu closed his eyes and whispered a blessing over and over without stopping. Karima was as pale as the moon. She held something out to Kyoshi, her hand trembling uncontrollably. This was stuck on a post in the town square, she said, her voice raw and bleeding. It was a note. Avatar, come find me in Qinchao village, alone. Pinned to the paper it was written on was a silky black top knot of hair, crudely severed from its owner's head. And that is the end of that chapter. Oh my god. Fuck. Lek is actually dead. Actually dead. Oh my god. He is for real dead. I'm so tempted to finish reading this book, but also, like, it's 30 more pages, and I feel like I could do that. Because it's 2 more chapters. But then this next chapter is super fucking long. I will do this on Monday. Fuck. I was starting to like Lek. Well, I liked Lek, but now I'm just like, man, he deserved better. He did. And now he's dead. God damn. Ah. Okay, rip. I know. I could keep reading, but I really don't want to. That's enough excitement. Fucking Jesus. I didn't think they were gonna kill him. I didn't think they were gonna fucking kill him off. But this is business. Okay. Well, thank you so much for listening, you guys. I will see you, and you will hear me in the last recording of this book. Thank you. Goodbye.